Welcome to this video on the functionalist views of the role of education from Sociology Sorted. This is a resource which teachers could use in lessons and that students might find useful for revision, particularly if they have missed lessons and want to go over what has been taught in class. The role and function of education is obviously a very important component in advanced level sociology and features in a number of exam board syllabuses. You will also find it at GCSE, however, although you can use this video and it will give you lots of useful knowledge, it is principally aimed at advanced level students and teachers. So going back to the advanced level exams, first, education is a significant and mandatory element of AQA Paper 1. It's also a very popular option on Paper 3 for schools that use the OCR board, and it's also an option on Paper 2 of the WJEC exam. There are a range of questions that you might face in an exam, where you might need, or want to, use material from the functionalist view of education. Some of these are fairly apparent, such as the 2012 OCR question, outline and assess functionalist explanations of the role of the education system in society. But you also get questions where the need to use functionalist ideas is a touch more hidden. If you have a look at the top two questions, from AQA on this slide, this is apparent. Although to most students, the idea that the education system is meritocratic would seem fairly obviously relating to functionalism, you can see it's a little harder to see, and then the question afterwards, about transmitting ideas and values, is a bit more obscure again. The starting point for thinking about how functionalists see education should be how functionalists view society as a whole. Functionalists think of a few key elements to society. The first broad overall question for functionalists is how is society maintained, and what they mean by this is, what stops society disintegrating, falling into disorder and disarray? And how does society ensure that this order continues through the generations? One of their answers to this is the education system. However, for functionalists, the education system is only part of the answer. They see a number of parts of society as having interlocking roles in creating social order. One part of society is dependent on other parts of society, and without all of these parts of society working together, the system as a whole would not function as well. Functionalists see the way society works as a whole as being similar to a living thing. This is known as the organic analogy. Those parts of society which have existed for many years, such as the education system, tend to be referred to as societal institutions. Functionalists suggest some of these are necessary to ensure that social order is maintained, and these are referred to as functional prerequisites. One of the most important of these is the idea of value consensus, the idea that as a society, we have a broad shared understanding of what is important, and this in some way, can be seen as what sets us apart as British. This is achieved through the education system. The three key thinkers that might feature in any account of the functionalist view of the role of education are Durkheim, Parsons, and Davis and Moore. Emile Durkheim is considered as one of the founders of sociology and social sciences in general. He made significant contributions to social theory and methods, and was recognized as a prestigious scholar in his own lifetime, holding a professorship at the University of Paris, and writing a number of important works. Talcott Parsons was a prominent academic at Harvard University for over 40 years. He developed the idea of structural functionalism, that society relies on key institutions to maintain and recreate itself. Kingsley Davis and Wilbert Moore were both PhD students of Parsons, but made significant contributions to the field in their own right. Starting with Durkheim. Durkheim had 2 or 3 key ideas about education. When you are writing essays or smaller questions in sociology exams, you often have to think about how many ideas you need to include, usually referred to as range, and how much detail you need to have. The first idea that Durkheim discussed was the idea of socialization. This could potentially be broken down into smaller ideas, but you do need to ensure that if you do break it down, you can go into enough detail in each part in the exam to ensure you don't drop marks. The second idea was that education supported the economy, and for Durkheim that created what he saw as the specialized division of labor, an important concept. These ideas were then developed, both by Parsons and Davis and Moore. Durkheim believed that the education system acted like a society in miniature. What he meant by this was that school was, in many ways, a mirror of adult life, where students could practice the skills they would need later on. For instance, school is an arena where students can hone their social skills. A particularly important part of this, for Durkheim, was that school was a place where students learned morals, what is right and wrong. In school, children are taught to obey authority and follow rules. This socializes them into behaving appropriately and following the law later in their adult life. This process helped to develop, what Durkheim referred to as the collective conscience. A shared view in society of what is right and wrong, and what the law should prohibit. This idea of moral education could be an argument in an exam response in itself, or you could combine it with the second element of socialization, social solidarity. Social solidarity is the idea that a society has a shared sense of belonging together, through shared norms and values. In essence, this is the idea that we know we are British, because we intrinsically understand the idea of things like queuing, or the NHS. Durkheim argued that schools instill and socializes this sense of social solidarity in students, through celebrations of national events and figures, such as the London Olympic Games, the monarchy and the Prime Minister, and the teaching of British history and literature, and more lately British values. We gain a sense of Britishness through British books and symbols, etc. Through this constant drip of British ideas in our education system, we bolster our British identity. Processes, like these in schools which are not obvious or apparent, are often referred to in sociology as the hidden curriculum. Durkheim and other functionalists also focused on how education serves the needs of the economy. Durkheim highlighted this in what he referred to as the specialized division of labor. He argued that in pre-industrial societies, such as medieval Britain, what you did in adult life was largely determined by your birth. There was no such thing as school. Consequently, if you were born into a family of woodcutters, it would be fairly likely that you would end up becoming a woodcutter, because that was all you knew. So being a woodcutter was what we refer to as an ascribed role. You were born into it. With the creation of industrialized societies, and the education systems that went alongside them, this changed. Now students were taught a range of skills such as maths, English, and crafts. Consequently, now a child brought up in a family of farmers could decide to become a journalist. We would describe this as an achieved role as it has been earned. This led to a specialized division of labor as people worked towards roles rather than simply following their parents. Durkheim argued that this created a change in the way that social solidarity worked. In pre-industrial society, there was what Durkheim referred to as mechanical solidarity. The majority of people did what their parents had done for a living. Their role was not something they had worked for. Most people were poor. Hence, there was a sense of people being equal and the same. In more advanced societies, Durkheim argued that there was more of a situation of what he referred to as organic solidarity. Our social solidarity was based on our interdependence. The dentist relied on the mechanic to fix their car, and the mechanic relied on the dentist to look after their teeth. The idea of social solidarity was achieved through people relying on each other. Parsons, our second theorist, went on to develop the work of Durkheim. He argued that school acted as a bridge between home life and the adult world of work, and adult society. Parsons argued that the home was a safe haven from the stresses and rigors of adult life. He referred to home as a warm bath, an idea we will pick up in other videos. Part of this was that adult norms and values would be relaxed in the home. Children might lie on the floor and watch television. This would obviously be unacceptable in the workplace. He referred to the norms that might be in place in the home as particularistic values, and those that are in place in wider society as universalistic values. Hence, Parsons argued that school acted as a bridge between the home and adult life, both in developing and fine-tuning our moral education, and our sense of social solidarity. You can't lay on the floor and watch TV at school, and individual differences between households on what it means to be part of society will be resolved in their children through the education process. Parsons also developed Durkheim's ideas on how education met the needs of the economy. He argued that in the education system, there was equality of opportunity, in that we all had the same ability to excel and show our natural talents. The education system was a meritocracy, in that it rewarded the most able and the hardest working, with the highest grades. It sifted students, so that the most able rose to the top, and it sorted them, so that each found the field they were best suited for. This was beneficial for everybody. We would want doctors to have a higher chemistry grade than nurses, and similarly, we would expect accountants to have a natural talent for maths. This was referred to as role allocation. Our last functionalist theorists are Davis and Moore. They added several important ideas to the functionalist view of how education meets the needs of the economy. First, they argued that some inequality was necessary for a society to function. They argued that unless there were unequal rewards, why would people engage in the long years of training, for instance, to become a doctor? An element of this idea is that the people in a society would agree to this inequality, as they would want the most able people to fulfill the most difficult and important roles. They also developed an approach to determining which roles deserved the highest rewards. They first argued that certain skills are more scarce than others, and hence require greater rewards to ensure they are developed. So, a society is prepared to pay an airline pilot more than a bus driver, and we pay brain surgeons more than cleaners. Second, they argued that some roles have greater responsibility, and hence require greater rewards. So if you are a CEO of a large company, and you make poor decisions, many of your workers may lose their jobs. Hence, it is important to pay people in these roles large salaries, to ensure we get the most competent people. An important part of answering questions in sociology exams may be evaluating, or arguing against the idea in the question. This can be part of an essay, or sometimes part of a shorter question. We look at this more in other videos in this series. There are several evaluations of functionalist ideas regarding education. First, postmodernists argue that functionalists don't take into account globalization and multiculturalism. Our modern education system is much more diverse than it was in prior generations, hence, the idea of social solidarity is problematic. Marxists, on the other hand, simply argue that the idea of meritocracy is a myth, and that the upper classes simply have too many advantages to make the system meritocratic. Think about ideas like tutoring. If you are wealthy, you are much more likely to get tutored over and above your usual lessons. Interactionists argue that rather than the working classes doing less well in education as a result of a lack of ability, it is actually a process of negative labeling. The working classes are labeled as weak. And this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Feminists, like Marxists, argue that education is not a level playing field, and that girls are systematically disadvantaged. Part of this is the argument that school socializes us into a patriarchal system, so that even if girls get higher grades than boys they still are disadvantaged in later life. A further important criticism of Davis and Moore's work directly came from Melvin Tuman. He argued that society was much more complex than Davis and Moore suggested. He said that it was difficult to compare and rank different roles, because they were all necessary in some way. Refuse collectors can be equally as important as nurses. We become very aware of this if our rubbish isn't collected for a few weeks. He argued that many of the super wealthy had inherited their wealth, and not gained it through effort or ability, in a meritocratic way, and he argued that many in society, such as mothers or priests, are not at all motivated by monetary rewards. His arguments undermine Davis and Moore's central idea of meritocracy. This slide is just a short summary of what has been discussed, which you might find useful. I hope you have enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you would like to ensure that you know when I produce new material, please subscribe to my channel. If this video has helped you either in your work or exam preparation, please consider buying me a coffee. Thank you for listening.